All right, welcome into another episode of Carps Corner. And as always, there's a lot going on, and sometimes it's good news, and sometimes it's not so good news. So, uh, number of things I wanted to get into in this episode. Some that are your classic sports football talk that's going to be uplifting and a nice break from reality, and give everybody a window into something they enjoy and love, and kind of distraction from maybe some things in your life that you don't necessarily love to deal with, and really just life in general. That's what sports and that's what entertainment always give us. Occasionally it hits a little too close to home. And so we'll deal with the good, we'll deal with the bad, and the things that will kind of evoke some emotions out of you and everyone who, when you watch people play and you cheer for them, you develop that relationship and you feel like you understand, somebody. And so we'll talk about the passing of Dwayne Haskins. Some news with Notre Dame and Brian Kelly, ultimately why in his mind, he left there, where Notre Dame he thinks is going, and where he ultimately has a chance to travel with LSU, and why those two jobs are significantly different. I think people looked at it and said, hey, so there's both two blue blood jobs. Notre Dame's never really had anyone leave before unless they were going to the NFL or ultimately retiring. And so with that, understanding maybe the alley's changed a little bit, and college football is not as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for sure not 15, 20, and 25 and beyond. So it's changed a lot. And Brian Kelly's comments on that, Von Miller ended up signing with the Buffalo Bills. Stefan Diggs, came out and talked about his relationship and his role of trying to get that done. And when you have your best players being your best recruiters, well, that helps immensely as well. And then some news, the Washington Commanders, and Buckeye there, Terry McLaurin, and potentially what could be on the horizon for him. But wanted to start with the Dwayne Haskins, the passing of him. And, I found out early Saturday morning, kind of a punch to the chest, and it was swirling around a little bit in some circles with the NFL and college football and media, just details coming out intermittently before it was ultimately broke. And right around noon, 11 on Saturday. And it's tough. It's tragic. Whenever you have somebody, in the prime of their life chopped down like that, and, the way that he passed, obviously it's very sudden and unexpected. And so most of the details now. It was, early morning, Saturday, I think 6:30, his rental car in Miami had run out of gas. I believe he was walking along 595, was down there apparently in South Florida with a number of other, Pittsburgh Steelers. And they were, I don't know, getting together, starting their workouts, before they officially started with the team, but a lot of good things. And apparently, was hit by a car, I believe a dump truck, if I'm not mistaken. I may not be 100% accurate on that, walking to go find a solution for his car that had run out of gas on the freeway. And I know there'll probably be more details and more things will come out, about this, but it seemed like a very benign event. And the NFL, him being a young guy, 24, like I said, newly married, you never want to see that happen. And it's one of the things that kind of brings together, college football rivalries, professional football rivalries. Everybody can relate and understand how difficult it is to lose a teammate and a friend, someone that really well, and someone that you shared common bonds with out there playing and competing on the field. And it was tough. It was definitely shocking for me getting a chance to know Dwayne a little bit while he was at Ohio State. Joe Burrow had some great comments about it. He was a guy they battled with, and ultimately Dwayne becomes a quarterback at Ohio State. Joe leaves and transfers to LSU and goes and does great things there. And they, there's a great scene from them, shaking hands. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati playing each other last year. But he was a guy that had a big heart, always wanted to be a Buckeye from the time he was young. Grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. And, it's incredibly tragic to see that happen. And you wish that there was something else that you could really say about it. You can talk about him as a person and everything that he's done, and, how gifted he was as a player. But, it's just really heartbreaking. In the NFL, as you look around and you see all of the guys rallying and understanding what it's like. I mean, so often, or so rarely rather, does this ever happen in professional sports and then in the NFL as well. And if it does happen and your guy usually passes away, there's usually something that goes on where you felt like, maybe they had, aided in their passing by choices that they had made, and a lot of times you see drinking and driving and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, this was being hit by a car walking on the side of the road. And, Adam Schefter threw out a tweet, which he promptly deleted. And we're going to throw that up here. Dwayne Haskins, a standout at Ohio State, before struggling to catch on with Washington and Pittsburgh in the NFL, died this morning when he got hit by a car in South Florida, per his agent, Cedric Saunders. Haskins would have turned 25 years old on May 3rd. He's about a month out from his birthday. And people took offense to that tweet, given the fact that, and I know Adam, and I think he's a good guy. He's an NFL football reporter. He often doesn't report on things that are life and death situations because football is entertainment. It's not life or death. You love it. You're passionate about it, but so oftentimes it's not. But he ultimately took down that tweet. And people were upset about, stand out at Ohio State before struggling to catch on with Washington and Pittsburgh. And that's what I think people look at. That's really useless information for this. A young man tragically passed away. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. His performance in the NFL at this point really is irrelevant, especially when it's that fresh. And we can talk about that later and, what all he did or didn't do in the NFL. And we'll get to the Gil Brandt radio interview here in a minute. But, I'm for right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of my friends and family will tell you I'm about as, a calloused and calculated person as you can find. And, I always, look at, causation for things that happen to people in their lives. It's like, well, you could have maybe foreseen this based upon what you were doing. If there was something Dwayne that was doing in his life that would have ultimately led to his untimely passing, well, I think that may have been pertinent information to put in there. But the fact that his football performance on the field and struggling to, catch on and this and that, like there was no relevance to it. And that's why Adam took it down and he deleted it. And at that point in time, just have a little compassion. And it's great. And Adam's a Michigan guy, and there's been some unbelievable people, on both sides of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry who have posted awesome stuff about Dwayne and everything that he meant. And, even the fact that he may have, revolutionized the Big Ten with his one season, starting at the helm when he ultimately came in and kind of rewrote the passing records. I mean, it had been really since Drew Brees had revolutionized it at Purdue 20 years earlier that, someone had come in and done something like that. And so it was really great to see that. And a lot of people rallying around it. That makes you feel good as the best part of sports and what it can ultimately be. So you see that, you struggle. Now, I'm going to play this Gil Brandt sound. And for those of you who don't know, Gil Brandt, longtime NFL exec with the Dallas Cowboys, 30 some odd years. I believe Jerry cut him loose when he got there with Landry. He's worked in the media since then. He's older. I think he's 90 years old, an older guy. And so, should he still be doing a lot of media stuff? And, at that point, I mean, if he likes it and people are willing to put him on, okay, I get it. But being asked about something, like I said, that's this fresh at this point in time, when you're a guy that's a little bit older and maybe you're not as quick on your feet as you once were, maybe that wasn't the best situation. But Gil Brandt had some comments that, we're not great. We're not great by any stretch. And we'll talk about him afterwards. But with that, let's take a listen.
I hate anytime anybody is killed or anybody dies, but he was a guy that was living to be dead, so to speak. They told him, don't under any circumstances leave school early. You just don't have the work habits. You don't have this. You don't have that. What did he do? Left school early. We invited players to the draft, and he was one of the players we invited to the draft. And we were told, no, we're going to have our own party. His own party was a party at the bowling alley, charged him $50 to get into the bowling alley for his party. It was always something, It's one of those things. I'm never offside, but they keep calling me for offside. It's a tragic thing. Anytime anybody dies, it's tragic, especially when you're 24 years old and you got your whole life ahead of you. But maybe if he'd have stayed in school a year, he wouldn't do silly things. I mean, I don't. When you're jogging on a highway on a road like that, that leaves it open, because I tell you, guy has 2 drinks and he's just a little bit to the right side of the road and gets hit and killed. It's easy to happen.
Okay, that is some tough stuff right there. And it's an older gentleman talking about a guy who had just passed away. And his family's grieving, his wife's grieving. Here's the thing. Did what he say, was that categorically untrue? No. Dwayne came out, there was people thought that he should come back to school, and people have questioned his maturity issues in the NFL. That's true. But what's also true is the fact that really had no bearing on anything that happened that led to his passing. And because of that is really needless information that shouldn't be out there. It shouldn't be talked about. There's a time and a place to discuss that, but it's not immediately after the guy died. It's not the same day that he passed away when you're bringing up some of this stuff in the NFL evaluations of him. And yes, Dwayne was supremely talented, has a great arm, great personality, great guy. There were some of those immaturity issues, but that doesn't matter right now. It doesn't matter at all. And especially when you're talking about it the day of the guy's passing. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Nothing from that led to ultimately how he lost his life. And so it's not pertinent information. So Gil Brandt obviously tweeted an apology. I think he felt it, and he probably realized afterwards, and it's tragic and it's heartbreaking, and you don't want to see that happen. But man, the day of his death, like, dude, that stuff doesn't need to be brought up. It doesn't need to be talked about. So, there's a university that's grieving. There's teammates that are grieving. There's a fan base. There's a family. All of those things are happening right now. And I enjoyed Dwayne. I really did. I really liked the guy. I really liked the kid. He had tons of talent. And I was hoping that he was going to be able to straighten out his NFL career and really kind of become the guy that you would have hoped. And unfortunately now, he's no longer with us. But outside of football, you lost a person. You lost a human being. And this is coming from a guy who's incredibly calloused and will look at, hey, how you've lived your life, and did it lead to the circumstances and outcomes that caused some of the problems? But none of that led for this with Dwayne. He was a pretty good kid, pretty good young man. At 24 years old, you hate to see it. You hate to see it. Okay, now we're going to try to move on and adjust and go to some other stories here and stay in college football. So here to start, Brian Kelly, new coach at LSU, left Notre Dame, a job that most people probably thought he would never leave. Generationally there, he's a Catholic guy. It seemed like his destination job. And he said, hey, they built their forever home. Brian Kelly stated he wanted to be in Notre Dame until his retirement. He just felt like they were on 2 different paths at that point. He had kind of done everything there that he felt he could have. And so, he finally gets out and talks about this. And here's some of the things that was said. And, we'll throw this up here on the screen. They're talking about, what he felt like he was looking for there was student athlete centered. And I was pushing more for the student athlete. I wanted to see that piece, and we didn't be on the same path on how that was going to be accomplished. And so what is Brian Kelly talking about with that? Well, he's talking about the fact that you look at a lot of these other schools and you look at everything that's gone on, they have dining halls in there. They have all this stuff, all the medical things you could ever want, massage therapists, dry needling, things to take care of all the new amenities. They've got a place where you can go work out, practice, study, eat, and you never have to leave. That's what Brian Kelly wanted in Notre Dame, and they weren't going to do it. Their AD, Jack Schwarbrick, was not on the same page, and they wanted to phase it in over time. And Brian Kelly's looking at this saying, I'm 60 years old. Phasing in, I'll be phasing out. I want to make sure that we get a chance to go win a national championship. And so, that is where some of that rub ultimately came. And it sounds simple. We'll throw this up to, take a look at, what does he really want? They've got an athletic complex that currently houses the football team and doesn't have a dining hall. So we don't have that, as he's talking about LSU's nutrition center, then reflexively referring to Notre Dame as we hand out the food that's pre-cooked. They have catering. I mean, he'd been requesting this for a long time. It's been on the books publicly since 2016. Um, Notre Dame's got one of the biggest endowments in all of colleges across the country. I mean, it's remarkable the amount of money that they have. So you'd think that they'd be able to upgrade their facility. And so what Brian Kelly said, like, and people were saying he was making excuses for not being able to win. My brother coached for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. He bounced by coach for Urban Meyer. He was at Cincinnati, played for BK too. Like, I think Brian Kelly's a really good football coach. I don't agree with everything that he does and the way he goes about it. And I've also poked fun at, his Southern accent, Louisiana accent, and all these different things. He can be a really tough guy to work for. And there's a lot of guys who probably don't enjoy working for him. But what he's saying is true. Like, Notre Dame, they have expectations up here, but the effort that they put into it from a university is down here. And once you have that lack of alignment right there, it's really hard to compete at a national level big time. And that's why you would see Notre Dame get to that, the college football playoff. They would get right to the fringe, but couldn't compete regularly with Bama's, the Clemsons, the Georgias, the Ohio States, Oklahoma's, because they were so heavily invested in football and getting it done. And Notre Dame still does things in an antiquated manner in a lot of senses with how they operate things, because that's the tradition of Notre Dame. And that's great. And it's fine. And you can have all of that, but you can't have all of that and then also expect your football team and football coach to go out and compete. And so that's why Notre Dame would generally be the best, I would say, of the rest, the best of the non creme de la creme schools. They're right on the fringe, but they couldn't getting over the top. The recruiting, the academics, different things. I know people think Marcus Freeman's going to come in there, and change things up and ultimately be a savior, but he still has some of the limitations that Brian Kelly will, as far as academic standards, getting kids into school. And then once you get there, how they take care of the players and, a dining hall and food. I mean, Ohio State did that. So we got to have a place to cook food here. We need food available all time parts of the day. Brian Kelly said at LSU, you go in there, you want gumbo at 11:30 at night, you get gumbo at 11:30 at night, basically. They have that. And that's the type of amenities the players are looking for. Should everybody have that? I don't know. Probably not. Is it necessary? No. But that's table stakes now in college football. That's what it is. And so you can't expect somebody to do something. And if someone really a coach wants to go win a national championship, understanding how hard it will be to do that when you don't necessarily have all of the tools and resources that some of the elite 4, 5, 6, 7 schools at the top all ultimately have. And those are the schools that you're competing against. And so I get why Brian Kelly was upset. I get why he ultimately left. He talked about them being on divergent paths. I want it student athlete centered, food, studying, meals, elite weight room, elite training room, everything, all there, all available to our players. And Notre Dame is like, hey, we'll phase this stuff in. We do things a different way here at Notre Dame. And I don't know if it's still the case, but the players, I think, had for a long time had to live in dorms for 4 years in college. Like, they want to be part of the normal student population. They didn't want to segregate them that much and do things a certain way. And that's fine. But that you get that gap. And that gap occurs. And that's what Brian Kelly saw. And he knew that unless that gap was tightened, he was never going to ultimately be able to compete with the elite schools. He said the Bamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Clemsons, the Oklahomas, schools that are doing all of those things, the Texases, when they can get it going. They have all that. Florida, all these schools do all of these things and spend so much money on it. Notre Dame has the money, but they ultimately want to run it. And they're probably a little nostalgic for how it was back in 1990. And so that's why Brian Kelly left. And I get it. I understand it. And people look at this like a hit piece. It's a reality piece. Could you win a national championship in Notre Dame? I think so, but you have to solve those problems. And you have to be able to come up to terms with the times and what players expect. Buffalo Bills been having a great offseason. Got their new stadium, $600 million is going to be funded, I think from the city or the county and the state. They got money coming there. Pagulas are kicking all their money. They got their stadium. You've got Von Miller coming aboard. You've got your guy, Josh Allen, for the future. I mean, everything looks to kind of be lining up for this Buffalo team to be able to make a nice 3 to 5 year run, and maybe even longer than that. But Stefan Diggs, they talk about his recruiting of Von Miller. He'd been working on this, he said, behind the scenes for months. Even before Von Miller went to LA, he was trying to get him so they could maybe trade for him then or have him at the end of the season. And this is funny. And so after that, he's been continuing to work on him. He said, you know what we got going, and you're going to see, and ultimately you're going to see what you want to get and what you can ultimately do in Buffalo. And the fact that you got a big time free agent like Von Miller to go there, Stefan Diggs to sign his big contract, all of these guys, like that's big time ball. And Stefan Diggs, like good for him for going out there and recruiting and bringing in another elite piece. If your best players are your best recruiters, to be able to bring guys in, hugely effective, especially in a city like Buffalo, that for a long time, and let's be honest, there weren't a lot. It wasn't exactly a free agent destination. And now that's changed a little bit because you got the QB, you're investing in the facilities and people you feel like you got to coach. And with all those things, you ultimately have a shot and a pathway to win. And lastly, finish up the Washington Commanders. They've yet to extend, their star young wide receiver, Terry McLaurin. They drafted him a couple years back, getting to that point where you're looking around saying, hey, maybe it's about time. Should maybe get this guy locked up. They just re-signed their defensive lineman, Jonathan Allen, big stud who was drafted in the same draft class, I believe, prior to camp in 2021. So hopefully coming into camp, they'll be able to get Terry McLaurin under wraps. And it's looking good for Terry McLaurin. If you look at the Hill deal, the Adams deal, the Diggs deal, those guys have reset the market. And not that Terry McLaurin is going to get money quite like those guys. I don't know if he's quite to that level, but he's played really well. He's the best thing they've got going. He's a Pro Bowl caliber player, and they need, number one, his play on the field, but number two, and maybe even more important, his leadership and what he does off the field and how he's a tone setter for everybody there. Terry McLaurin, elite human being. I'm excited to see him finally get his deal, and hopefully the Washington Commanders get on this and get that taken care of. Because you're seeing wide receivers now getting pushed up in the draft because they're getting paid more in free agency. It's an incredibly valuable position. And they've got a good one who's a grinder, who's a worker, who's not a prima donna. He's not a diva in Terry McLaurin. So Washington Commanders, pay Terry McLaurin, get that thing done before the start of the season. He's a great leader. He's a great player. He makes your team better. And you need guys like him if you ultimately want to be successful and try to turn around a franchise that, let's be honest, they've been in the news for everything but football, it seems like, over the last couple of years. And Terry McLaurin's a guy you can put in front of a microphone and you're like, man, I like that dude. He's a likable figure. He's a leader. He's a quality human being. And he's a guy that you need to take care of and you need to ultimately pay. So let's get that done. Washington, take care of your guy, Terry, Scary Terry, who's the leader and probably kind of the face of your franchise until you can get your quarterback situation truly figured out. And I don't know if Carson Wentz is that guy. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But you want to have receivers for him to throw the ball to if he ultimately becomes that guy. So that's all for this edition of Carps Corner. I appreciate all the support. People love the Buckeye stuff that I throw in there. Continue to do that during the spring. Probably throw some other stuff together during the summer, and a lot, obviously, during football season. So please keep subscribing, keep sharing, posting comments. Any questions you have, I'd love to be able to answer those things for you. Whether it's Ohio State, college football, NFL, sports in general, always love to do that. So thank you again for tuning in and listening. The more support I get on this, the easier it makes it to do. It's more fun ultimately for me as well. So thank you for all of that. We had a somber opening with the passing of Dwayne Haskins, and then got into some other great football stories. But I'll leave with this, Dwayne Haskins, quality young man. And the world is less of a place without him in it. So RIP, sir. Rest in peace. Miss you, Dwayne. And thoughts, prayers go out to your wife and your family. Thanks.